Hey, it's Greg Schinkel from the Accelerating Operational Performance podcast. I'm excited in this episode to bring you an interview that I did with Scott Jenkins from the Chemical Engineering podcast. And even though we do touch on chemical engineers as the discussion, I think it really applies to all engineering disciplines when you're trying to make the decision as to whether you should become a people leader within engineering or should you stick with the technical career path. So enjoy the episode.
Hey, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Chemical Engineering Podcast. I'm Chemical Engineering Magazine's senior editor, Scott Jenkins. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about career paths taken by engineers in the chemical process industries. This topic kind of extends to other areas of engineering as well, but focusing on chemical process industries, but it also is a broader topic here. Engineers often face this career decision where they have to choose between focusing on deepening technical knowledge, technical strengths, or kind of taking a more leadership path and becoming a manager. And these two paths kind of often require different skills and approaches and have to be considered very carefully. So, we're going to explore some of these questions that come along with this career fork in the road. And to help us with this topic, we have Greg Schinkel. He's the president of Unique Training and Development, which is a company that conducts supervisor training for managers in manufacturing and operations organizations, among other things. And so, Greg, thank you so much for being with us.
It's a real honor to join you today.
So I introduced you very briefly, but I wonder if you could just take a minute and tell us a little bit more about your own background and a little bit about what the company does.
Yes, well, thanks, Scott. Even though I'm not a professional engineer, I feel like I'm so adjacent to it. I got my start. We figured that my father, Erwin, and I started at General Motors about 30 years apart, almost to the day.
That's cool.
And so I went to General Motors Institute, it was called, in Flint, Michigan. And it's mostly an engineering school, an engineering co-op school. But I was in the 10% that was really in the business threshold. But when I worked at GM, I got to do stints in industrial engineering. And over the years, of course, being in the manufacturing, training, and development business, we definitely have a lot of engineers who we've worked with and helped grow. And so I took the business over back in 1992. So I'm 34 years in the business. And we, like you said, Scott, we train a lot of frontline supervisors, team leads, and managers. And lately we've evolved to do plant manager development. I know we're going to explore that a little bit because that's one of the career paths for engineers.
Very cool. Thanks. All right. Yeah. Let's continue on that line here. So let's start, if you wouldn't mind, just explaining these two career paths that engineers may take. One, the technical path, and then the other that you might call the leadership path. Just tell us how these paths kind of arose in these process type companies, and where and how they might conflict with each other and potentially cause challenges for career paths.
Yeah, it's a great question, Scott. I always think like if you go back far enough, there was only one stream. And the stream was if you wanted to get promoted, you had to become a people manager. And so even if you didn't love managing people and you found it aggravating and stressful, that's the only way you could really move up is through becoming a people manager. And then, I credit some of this to a book written by Marcus Buckingham from the Gallup organization at the time. It was called First Break All the Rules. And what was novel about that book is it said you shouldn't have to leave the stuff you're good at and know well and love in order to advance. There should be two streams. Now, I don't think it's that book that caused it, but then what companies started to do, Scott, is they started to agree that you need the technical talent to advance in the organization. And you don't want somebody who doesn't like leading people to have to choose that career path in order to stay in the organization and advance. So companies really did split it up. The way I view it, Scott, is that the analogy I think is like a bicycle. The rear wheel of the bicycle is where the power comes from. It's the driving, and that's really the engineering, technical skills, and talents. And then the front wheel of the bicycle really determines the direction, and that is it steers things to maximize the impact. So that honestly, Scott, that would apply even if I want to stay in the technical stream. I still have to have some people skills. But if I'm okay leading people, and I know we're going to dig into it a bit more, then I just want to look at that can be the key to success, right? So I think companies evolved this way because they didn't want to lose their technical talent, and not
Mm,
everybody should become a people leader. But for those who do, it is an excellent alternative.
yeah, that's great. So, yeah, we'll definitely come back to a few of those items here, but the next question is kind of about engineers themselves. If they're looking to try to determine, like some people might it might be obvious, like I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. They know what they want, but some maybe it's not clear. So, what kinds of questions should people be asking themselves in order to try to determine what will bring them a greater sense of fulfillment in their career?
Yeah, I think it's great to ask yourself some of these reflective questions, Scott. So, one of the biggest questions to ask yourself, and this is probably not just at any one time in your career, but maybe multiple times in your
Mm,
career, is where do you get the most joy from your work? Is you know if you get joy strictly from solving problems and doing really hardcore technical analysis, then that tells you something. If, on the
mhm,
other hand, and how much of your joy comes from interacting with others. So
mm,
that starts to build into the team dynamic. So I've noticed actually many engineers are also athletic, or they have a competitive spirit, and they have a sense of teamwork and camaraderie. And I think if you get joy through working in a team, that's an indicator that maybe you should at least consider people leadership. And then perhaps the biggest question to reflect on is, engineers are often, at least in the early stages of their career, really focused on getting good at doing their job and doing it well.
mm,
But if you can evolve to the part where your greatest fulfillment is seeing a team perform, and maybe even some of the engineers you might lead as a team lead or as a manager and executive, if you can start to get a sense of fulfillment in watching them grow and get better than you were, that would
mm.
be a flashing light that says you should really think about a people leadership position.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That sounds right. Um, what about some strategies that engineers could use to try to kind of evaluate what their skills are and how good they are, and what aspects of their personality might lend themselves to a certain path, or kind of try to align their individual strength with the milestones of their career.
Yeah, no, I think it's great to look at tools, and it's interesting. I'm doing the podcast with you today, but at the same time, we're delivering a session in a room not far from where I am, really on high performance work systems. And in that class, there's several engineers, and what I'm noticing is that they're coming to the recognition that in order to bring their engineering talent to the operations team and overall drive performance, that there's a lot of personality nuances, sources of tension and conflict that they need to master. I think one of the tools that many people come across in their careers, but you could seek it out, is an assessment tool. So an assessment tool
Mm,
could be like the DISC type assessment, which is there's 40 different versions. A couple of them are more popular than others. And all that helps you sort out is where is your personality characteristics in terms of
mm,
whether you're a driver, an influencer, are you a hardcore analytical clarifier, are you more
right.
social? And in
Sure.
reality, as Scott, even though those kinds of assessments tend to pigeonhole you into one
Yeah,
one
yeah.
box or another, most of us are actually a blending. So if
Right.
you found out that, yeah, you have an analytical base, but you also have this desire to influence and work with others, that will start to open your mind up to, maybe I'm not the type of person who wants to work in isolation solving problems. I do love business as a team sport. So you can use a DISC
Yeah.
assessment. There's other assessment tools out there, and certainly I'd be happy if people reach out to direct them to some. One of my favorites is actually one that helps you figure out how constructive you are in your thinking versus how defensive you are in your thinking. So
Mm,
defensive just means that you tend to either attack and criticize, and sometimes
right.
engineers can get into that mode where they can pick apart flaws as part of their risk
Right.
mitigation focus. But how do you shift to being this constructive person who's trying to drive excellence in terms of the processes and the people?
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things you mentioned a little bit in that answer was this idea of functioning more as part of a team versus more like individual effort. Um, would you talk a little bit about the importance of being able to function as a team versus working as an individual, and how that can affect career paths and decisions in your career?
Yeah, no, I think it's good to dig into this a little bit. First of all, you got to recognize that at least in Western culture, it's sort of this idea of rugged individualism, right? And
Mm,
there's this bias almost towards having to solve all the problems yourself, try to be the smartest person in the room, and the reality is the reason we have organizations, the reasons why we have plants and production facilities is we've recognized that we're going to get more done through the efforts of collaboration in a team.
mhm,
And so one of the activities that we're doing with this group we're working with this week is a survival simulation. And in the simulation, it basically shows that if you have a really smart person with some really great ideas, but no one buys into the ideas or gets behind them and commits to them, you're just not
yeah.
going to get the traction. At the same
Right.
token, as if you have a really bad idea, but everyone agrees, you're obviously going to go in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
So I think if we acknowledge that silos in organizations do tend to form either between functions or locations or the floor in the office, what engineers can realize is if I can be a collaborator and start breaking down those silo walls and tap into the organizational teamwork, I could
Mhm.
probably affect some of my great ideas for improving processes, and I can actually get them implemented. I can get the operations team to buy in, I can get the engineering team to buy in, and I can see some of my possibilities come to life. So I think the strongest teams have a set of norms that they buy into, like what does it take to be a member of this team,
Mhm.
and then they also create psychological safety, which is this openness. And honestly, because I grew up adjacent to engineers in most
Mhm.
of my career, I will know that sometimes because you do have a better sense of what's right and wrong and good and bad and what works and doesn't work, the challenge is that you can almost come off as overly critical. And you might not realize it, but if you're in a group dynamic and you start picking apart people's ideas, and you could based on their technical
Mhm.
merits, the reality is one of the reactions you're going to get is people stop contributing. And
Mhm.
then engineers should just be aware of if you're the only person talking or the last person talking, there's something going on in that dynamic. And so
Yeah.
I think it's recognizing that at first it's all about you, and then it has to be all about us.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. So that actually leads pretty well into this other question. So let's take someone, for example, who either by choice or by circumstances found themselves in this more managerial role, or one where they have to take on a leadership position. Um, what are some of the communication skills that they should be cultivating or seeking out that'll really help them excel or do well in that arena?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So a couple of things come to mind. First of all, people should, I think it's probably intuitive, but I'll just say it anyway. Communication is like the transmission between an idea and execution, right? So if not strong in communication skills, we're just not going to have people buy in and move things forward. So
Right.
for engineers specifically, recognize that there's a tendency to overemphasize logic over emotion. And I don't know about you, Scott, but you interact with enough people and you really question whether there is a lot of logic, right? There's a lot of emotion, and emotion trumps
Yeah.
logic. And so it's in that mode where, as an engineer, acknowledging that although you might be ready to jump right into a task, you have to acknowledge that there are emotional needs. And I don't want to get too touchy feely with the crowd
Right.
that's
Right.
probably
Right.
taking this information in, but just being aware that there's a human dynamic. Second
Yeah.
tip for communications is to remember to be precise and not vague.
Hmm.
Um, when people ask what is the definition of good communication, Scott, I usually say, like, did the person do what you'd hope that they would do after the conversation? That would be a
Yeah.
thumbs up.
Right.
And then if you're the receiver, it's like, did I know what I needed to know to do what I was
Mm-hmm.
supposed to do and do it to the
Mm-hmm.
level that was expected? I think the thing we forget about is that people don't like to have these negative surprises where I didn't know this thing. And because I didn't know, or I didn't know what your expectations were, I let you down, and then they
Mm.
feel bad. And that's a negative emotion. A couple other quick things: ask versus tell. I think engineers like to tell people, what they think the answers are and what their logic is, and there's certainly a lot of value in that. But asking people what they think, even if you do decide to become a team leader of other engineers, you really want to test their ability to solve problems, because that's what you're trying to cultivate over time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Again, engineers, because they're risk mitigation focused, they do tend to see flaws. And so, one of the other tips that we would give on communication is focus on building on positives. You're building capabilities over time. And then my last communications tip, Scott, and it's something I have to remind myself of because I'm very task oriented, is
Mm-hmm.
empathy and listening skills. Can
Right.
you actually be present long enough to hear somebody's answer before you want to either override them or respond?
Right. Right. That's a good one. So let's take a look at someone, for example, who may be in a technical role now, but they're thinking about potentially pursuing like a manager leadership role. Um, what are some of the hazards and challenges that those folks might encounter as they try to make that transition or make that shift?
Yeah, you know what I think, Scott, probably the biggest thing that they deal with, and I certainly dealt with it as I was running a smaller company that became a mid-sized company, is the biggest challenge is dealing with what you perceive as a loss of control.
Hmm.
Because the biggest change and the hazard that you're running into is you used to just have to deliver your own work product and meet your own milestones and your own commitments. Once you start to be on the people leadership side, you're now measured and assessed based on how well you get results from a team. The other thing people probably have to get used to when they step into the leadership role is that leadership is a long game. Engineering can also be a long game, but it can also be a short game. Like, I've got a problem that I need to fix, or a system I need to design, or an
Hmm.
outage I need to plan for, or something. But
Right.
really, I do want to solve problems and get to the right answers, but I also want to build the capability of the team to solve problems and get the right answers. And
Hmm.
so, um, an example of that would be, the tendency would be to put the most experienced, most skilled person on a given task or a project. But when you realize that you're trying to build the capabilities of a team, it means you might have to let a junior engineer run an outage plan or an outage meeting or take on a project because you're developing them. So you're supporting them while you're putting them in that mode. But I think right off the bat, most engineers would say, I'm going to put my most skilled, my most experienced, most capable person on any given task. But your goal is to build the team up over time. And then I think the last part, and I have to say this, Scott, even though it's going to be a bummer for anybody hearing it, is every management job comes with an admin workload that you probably never said you'd ever want to do in your life. Things like
Hmm.
budgeting, things like
Yeah.
planning sessions,
Yeah.
performance reviews,
Right.
interacting with HR and talent. Now, my coaching for that is to avoid that getting, like, dragging you down too far. It's to realize that it's still something you should have value added, and you can question it in some cases, but you're still going to have to do some things and be in some meetings that you question why do you
Hmm.
want that to be part of your life.
Yeah.
But it does come with the territory, and so. But don't allow it to be the reason you wouldn't go for it. Just know that it's something that has to be done. You can influence it, you
Hmm.
may not be able to control it. And you can also decide how much of your energy and attention you're going to put to those things. Because I think you could get more out of it than just checking the box, but you'd have to view it as, okay, I have to do budgeting. What can I do with the budget to move the organization forward, move my team forward?
Right. Right. Let's take a look from the perspective of an organization itself. What could a company or an organization do to try to both cultivate engineers who have skills that lend themselves to leadership roles, but also trying to avoid the situation where they're getting people in the wrong buckets. So,
Yeah.
what are some things that companies should be thinking about in terms of like what they can do to make this seamless or make this as optimized as they can?
Yeah, I think if companies viewed this as essential, just like they view their capital expenditures and their
Hmm.
other processes, I also want everyone to know, including the engineers who are, again, dealing with this dilemma, do I go people leadership or not? Remember the tenets of the scientific method. I'm doing this for the engineers, right? The scientific method is I have a hypothesis, and then I'm going
Yeah.
to do a series of experiments to prove my hypothesis or not. So what we've talked about so far, Scott, is I've got a hypothesis. I think I might like the people side. I think I might not. I'm not sure. But the other thing is you can't decide all these things without trying them out. So I'm not sure that everyone can really flip a switch, the ones and zeros, to figure out is it for me or not. So
Hmm.
I think what companies need to do is they need to create small leadership experiences where people can get a feel for things,
Yeah.
like to work in project teams, to be responsible for a shared goal or a shared project. Um, and I think then you're able to test things out, because trying to decide ahead of time whether you want to be a people leader or a technical expert,
Yeah.
I don't know about you, Scott, but I think everybody in their career goes through a few evolutions over their years. Think early on, most people, if they compared their career 10 or 15 years later to what they thought 10 or 15 years ago, it's a very different thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's staying open-minded, and companies have to do that. Now, I do think that one of the things that a senior level leader can do is to recognize the importance of good one-on-ones. I had an engineer in one of my frontline leadership classes that we do for supervisors, and this is in a power generation type environment.
Hmm.
But he said, all I really want is to have a one-on-one with my boss. And this was a young professional engineer in his 20s. And his boss, who I hate to admit it, had also taken our course, a while back. But his boss's response was, "If you're screwing up, I'll let you know. Otherwise, assume no news is good
Right. Right.
news." And I thought, oh my gosh, this young engineering talent, all he really wants is maybe every other week touch base
Right.
with his boss for 15 or 20 minutes. And I think if engineering leaders would realize that these one-on-ones, these casual conversations that are not just about the project or the thing we're trying to work on, but
Hmm.
how are you finding it? How did you find that assignment? How was that project? Hey, I noticed you were really good in that meeting. Have you ever thought about this? And so this is
Hmm.
the other thing I'd say, Scott, is that if you wait for someone to come and say, Scott, I want that promotion, I want to be a team leader, I think you're missing the boat. I think what leaders need to do is they need to nudge people and say, I see this in you, and I think
Mm.
it's something you should consider, because a lot of folks won't necessarily land at this moment in time where they say, yeah, put me in, coach, I'm ready for this. Now, on the other hand, it's to recognize that your technical, the people who choose to be in the technical stream, which again is subject to change, and
Hmm.
somebody can move from one to the other. It's if you're going to be in the technical stream, you really need to look at how do I make that practice of engineering and technical ability? How do I really get the most out of it? How do I build excellence into the technical stream as well? I think if companies
Mm.
do that, they are going to have a very robust talent development pipeline. And one thing we have to watch for, because we're in this mode where I'm going to force feed you this same work over and over again until you don't like it
Hmm.
anymore. And we have
Hmm.
to realize that engineers didn't become engineers usually to just do one thing. So if you're going to
Right.
cultivate people on the technical side, make sure you're giving them a well-rounded way to become true
Right.
masters,
Right. Right.
and learn multiple facets of it.
Yeah. That makes sense. One thing I was going to also ask you about is most of the people that are listening to this are probably already in the professional field, but there may be some who are still students. And I'm wondering if you could just talk about at the university level, are there anything that either students or universities could do to try to help make students aware of these paths and what choices they may have and what skills they might need?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. I always think, Scott, I asked this of a medical doctor once at MD, and I said, how many classes out of your 4 years or 7 years or 10 years did you have on bedside manner and managing a practice? And they go
Yeah.
like, I had one class or one lecture or something.
Right.
So I think the same thing goes in engineering school is remember, the professors are also there to teach from their expertise. They publish themselves. They're
Hmm.
heavily into the research, and so there's probably a heavy emphasis, as you'd expect, on technical capabilities. But what I think, and again, students could try some of these on their own, but it helps if the faculty designs it into the program,
Yeah.
is could we give people a little bit of insight into the non-technical streams of an engineer in their career. So if the professors are focused mostly on technical skills and capability development, that's fine. But think about this: most engineering curriculum and the mandate of an engineer, and in fact, part of becoming a professional engineer, is this focus on risk reduction and mitigating risk, and designing things that diminish risk,
Hmm.
and that's very important in chemical processes and plants. Um, but there also needs to be some group work, some group projects, some things where the students, it's not just whether you pass the exam on a bell curve, but like, did you have to work with some colleagues to solve a problem, to do
Hmm.
something? Many schools will have these as kind of like enhancements, like, we have to build a race car, we have to, design a process or
Yeah.
a science fair type of thing, but something where they have to work together collaboratively. In business school, we used to get these 48-hour challenges, and you'd stay up sometimes the whole night because you'd be given a case and you had to figure out a solution. You had to work with a team and you had to present your results. And I think if people realize that mitigating risk, which is one of the key tenets of becoming an engineer, is also to mitigate social risk. And that is about creating buy in, thinking about social systems, thinking
Hmm.
about how people interact with the systems that we create and the processes that we create. Usually the weak link is human beings because we're a little bit erratic, but it's
Yeah.
like, could we build this into the curriculum a little bit so that people
Mm.
realize that being a great engineer is going to be more than just being super smart, which you probably are going to be, but like how you work with others. And I think that could play a role in making the curriculum even better.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks for that. If we're talking about this shift again from technical role to leadership role, we've talked some about the challenges that are inherent in doing that. But what are some of the positive outcomes or the positives aspects that come from achieving greater success in this area?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Because right up till now, people are probably saying, "Well, it sounds like a lot of headaches versus, what gains I'm going to get from it." But
Yeah.
if you start to believe that the true transformation in a company is really when you get a multiplier effect going. So
Mm.
again, I go back to engineers are usually really competent, very strong people who can generate and solve problems. But if you can get that mindset where it's a collaboration, it's a multiplier, then you
Mm.
can really transform from an innovation standpoint. You can make true like improvements happen in companies. Scott, I still think that companies in the chemical business, they need to really look at, even if they have a well-running operation with very little unplanned downtime, there's
Mhm.
still so many opportunities to make it even better. And I think if an engineer really grabs on to, being part of a team, first of all, and then eventually leading a team, they
Mhm.
can really get a lot of satisfaction in seeing things actually transform and improve. And I would just say if you get into it and you start to love it, like I hope you'll love it in terms of leadership, that
Mhm.
eventually you might get to start up a new operation, or you might get to put a new expansion on the plant, or you might get to upgrade it significantly. And I hope that you can get the feeling that seeing a group of people come together to achieve that, if you can get that as a satisfaction, honestly, Scott, there's no limit to what you can achieve in your career. Even though most people don't want to change places with the site leader, know
Yeah.
that that site leader is just a person too. And the only difference is that they have a broader scope of responsibility and a broader scope of impact. And engineers are really positioned well to do that job well. And
Mm.
so it shouldn't be something that you go, I wouldn't want all the hassles of that job. Look at the upside. This is your chance to really move the organization forward and help people achieve things that they never thought were possible.
Yeah. That's very cool. Um, we've touched on a bunch of topics here. I wonder if there's anything else, the kind of final thoughts that you wanted to leave us with before we sign off.
Yeah. Well, one thing, Scott, is just on that note of maybe, you don't have to dream of being a site leader right now. but maybe someday you might
Mhm.
consider it. I think what we're looking at here is that companies will tell people, oh, you need to develop strategic thinking skills. Many companies will have that as a competency, but nobody really tells you what it means to be a strategic thinker. So I think, everyone stumbles around saying you got to be a strategic thinker. And that's actually one of the things we're achieving with this new plant manager excellence program that we're
Mhm.
kicking off this fall. It's really, how do I, as an engineer, because we feel that people come up either through the engineering stream or through the production stream and operation stream, but how do I start to think about what is my vision or picture of the future for the facility, for what's possible? How do I clarify accountability of outcomes? How do I build the optimization of the processes and the engagement of the team together? And so I would just say to engineers, I totally get it. If you're new in your career, get those technical chops, well
Mhm.
honed, and then start to open yourself up to the idea of how you could work in a team, inspire a team, lead a team to affect change. And then honestly, you could probably take on any executive role in the future, because once you know how to do it, you just rinse and repeat over time.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to leave the conversation there for now. Greg, thank you so much again for sharing your experience and expertise with us. Just real quick, if people wanted to learn more or get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, well, I certainly would welcome any conversation. Scott, a lot of people think it can be intimidating to reach out to people. I would just welcome them to, they can reach me on LinkedIn, Greg
Mhm.
Schinkel on LinkedIn. You can also, we have a ton of videos on YouTube that people can absorb. If you are a site leader, of course, reach out to us about that. But people can reach out to uniquedevelopment.com.
Mhm.
We're a mid-sized company, where we're not a really large company, so you can reach out to me there. I would welcome any conversation that would help somebody on their journey of engineer to leadership, in any way that can help them advance and move forward.
Nice. All right. Thanks again. So, to all you listening, thanks for listening and stay tuned for more episodes upcoming of the Chemical Engineering Podcast. Once again, I'm Scott Jenkins. And until next time, thank you.